The night air was cool on my face. It should have been refreshing, invigorating. But it wasn't. A strange unease had gripped me since I left Mark's place. Maybe it was his ghost stories, told in hushed whispers as we huddled around flickering candlelight. Or maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to lengthen as I walked, stretching out like grasping claws. I picked up my pace, my heart thudding a steady rhythm against my ribs. My eyes darted from one darkened doorway to another, each one a potential hiding place for... well, I didn't want to think about it. My breath caught in my throat as a sudden rustling came from the bushes lining the sidewalk. Just the wind. It had to be. I told myself to calm down. There was nothing to be afraid of. It was a safe neighborhood. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, followed. Each flickering streetlight seemed to intensify the darkness around it, creating an unsettling tableau of light and shadow. I lengthened my stride, my eyes scanning the street ahead, desperately seeking the familiar comfort of my porch light. Just a few more blocks. I could make it. I had to make it. The streetlight buzzed, its pale glow an anemic attempt to pierce the oppressive darkness that clung to the night. The shadows it cast were long and distorted, writhing like phantoms in the night. A lone figure stood beneath the flickering lamppost, its features obscured by the shifting shadows. My breath hitched in my chest. I slowed my pace, fear prickling at the edges of my awareness. As I cautiously drew closer, the figure stepped into the pool of light. It was a man, tall and slender, dressed in a long, dark coat that seemed to swallow him whole. He was facing me, but his head was tilted at an odd angle, as if he were listening for something. And then I saw it, his smile. It was a grotesque, unnatural stretching of his lips, revealing a row of teeth that seemed too large, too sharp for his mouth. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't even a cruel smile. It was a smile that spoke of madness, of something profoundly disturbing lurking beneath the surface. My stomach churned. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run. But my feet felt rooted to the spot, my body paralyzed by a fear so primal it sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could only stare at the man with the unnerving smile. The man's smile widened, stretching further across his face until it seemed impossible, inhuman. It was as if his mouth was a wound, a gaping maw that threatened to consume him whole. The shadows around him seemed to deepen, responding to his unnatural grin. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. I was trapped in a nightmare. A waking horror that seemed to have sprung from the darkest recesses of my subconscious. The man took a step toward me, and the smile stretched even wider. It was a slow, deliberate movement calculated to inspire terror. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the night. "Run!" my mind screamed. "Run now!" But my legs remained frozen, as if encased in blocks of ice. His smile seemed to hold me captive, drawing me in like a moth to a flame. He took another step, and the distance between us shrank. I could smell him now, a strange, cloying scent that reminded me of dust and decay. My stomach lurched, threatening to spill its contents onto the pavement. This was wrong. So very wrong. The man stopped, just a few feet away from me. The smile never wavered, never faltered. It was a rictus of madness, frozen in time. His eyes, however, were cold and calculating, devoid of any warmth or humanity. They bored into me, seeing right through me, stripping away my defenses. I tried to speak, to stammer out a question, a greeting, anything to break the terrifying silence that stretched between us, but my tongue felt thick and useless in my mouth, and no sound emerged. My breaths came in short, shallow gasps, as if I had been running for miles. He tilted his head, the unnatural smile somehow growing even wider. It was a physical impossibility, yet there it was, defying all sense of logic and reason. The shadows around him seemed to writhe and pulsate, as if they, too, were unsettled by this grotesque display. He reached out a hand, his long, pale fingers beckoning me closer. "Don't be afraid," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp that seemed to scrape against my eardrums. But his words did nothing to calm my terror. In fact, they only amplified it, sending a fresh wave of fear cascading down my spine. Something inside me snapped. The paralysis that had gripped me shattered, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. I didn't think, didn't hesitate, I just reacted. Spinning on my heel, I ran faster than I'd ever run before. The pounding of my feet against the pavement was the only sound that mattered. The only sound that could drown out the echo of that chilling smile in my mind. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for respite, but I didn't dare slow down. Every fibre of my being was consumed by the need to escape, to put as much distance between me and that thing as possible. The streetlights blurred into streaks of light and shadow as I raced past. Houses became indistinguishable blurs, their windows dark and vacant. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't bear to see if he was following me. But I could hear him, faintly at first, a whisper of sound carried on the night wind, a soft, shuffling sound, the sound of footsteps. He was following me. Terror lent speed to my already frantic pace. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my lungs, the aching in my legs. My vision narrowed to a tunnel, everything else fading into insignificance. Only the need to escape remained. The footsteps grew louder, closer. He was gaining on me. I could feel his presence behind me, a palpable weight of menace that threatened to drag me down. My breath came in ragged gasps now, each one a struggle. My legs felt like lead, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. Not while that thing was still on my trail. Finally, my house came into view. A beacon of warmth and light in the cold darkness of the night. I surged forward, my hand trembling as I fumbled for my keys. The footsteps were right behind me now, close enough to touch. I slammed the key into the lock, the metal cold against my clammy skin. The door swung open and I stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me and fumbling for the deadbolt. My fingers found the lock, slid it into place. Safety. I was safe. I leaned against the door, my chest heaving, my entire body trembling with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. The world outside my door seemed to hold its breath, the silence broken only by the frantic beating of my own heart. Had he stopped, or was he still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to make a mistake? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror washing over me. I crept into the living room, my footsteps silent on the plush carpet. The familiar surroundings should have brought comfort, but they couldn't erase the memory of that night, of that smile. It played on a loop in my mind, the way it stretched, impossibly wide across his face. The way his eyes seemed to bore into me, cold and calculating. The rasp of his voice, whispering words that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that he was still out there. Somewhere in the darkness, his gaze fixed on me. The shadows in the room seemed to shift and writhe, taking on sinister shapes in my terrified mind. I jumped at every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside my window. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smile, felt the icy grip of fear tighten around my heart. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that he was always just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. I stopped going out at night, terrified of encountering him again. My world shrank, constricted by my own fear. I tried to tell myself it was just a bad dream, a figment of my imagination, but the memory was too vivid, too real. The smile, the eyes, the voice, they haunted my waking hours, invaded my sleep. My friends told me to relax, that I was letting my imagination run wild, but they didn't understand. They hadn't seen his face, hadn't felt the icy touch of his gaze. They didn't know the terror that lurked in the shadows. The encounter with the smiling man left an indelible mark on my psyche. It was a chilling reminder that the world could be a dark and unpredictable place, where even the most ordinary night could transform into a terrifying ordeal. I never saw him again, but his presence lingered like a ghost, a constant shadow in the corner of my eye. The fear he instilled in me that night became a part of me, a constant companion that whispered warnings in the back of my mind. The smiling man may have disappeared into the night, but the memory of that encounter, of that chilling, unnatural grin, would forever remain etched in the darkest recesses of my mind, a chilling reminder of the night I came face to face with true terror.